Hey everyone, I'm so glad you're here because today we're going to tackle one of the most difficult decisions any of us might face when a real crisis hits. And that's whether to stay put in our homes, trusting the supplies we've built and the security we've prepared, or whether it's time to pack up and get out while we still can. It's not just about survival. It's about timing, risk, instincts, and the weight of knowing that one wrong decision could make things much worse. And it's easy to get stuck in that fear of making the wrong call at exactly the wrong moment. This conversation matters because we're not just simply asking, should I stay or should I go? We're talking about emotional pressure, logistical obstacles, family dynamics, and the very real possibility that the wrong move could leave you trapped, exposed, or cut off from help when you need it most. Before we dive in, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. It helps get this information to the people who actually care about being ready when things go south. So in this video, we're going to break it all down. The myth of a perfect answer, the emotional toll of leaving what you've built, the hard truth about supplies and mobility, what it really takes to protect your home if you decide to stay, and the mindset it takes to pivot when the situation changes faster than you expected. This isn't a list of quick tips. It's a real-world walkthrough of how to make the call when the pressure's on. Let's get into it. I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks for new preppers is the expectation that someone out there has written a definitive checklist. If the power is off for more than 36 hours, you leave. Or if the roads close in the next county, you stay. Or if the news says the word martial law, you pack your bags. It sounds so reassuring to imagine that you could open a manual, see your exact situation described and say, aha, the solution is this. But in reality, crises are fluid, meaning they shift and evolve in real time, sometimes in ways that no static checklist can capture. Maybe you're one of the lucky ones who has a house on high ground. So a flood that devastates your town might still leave you with a secure place to stay, but if that flood cripples the local water treatment plant or knocks out power indefinitely, suddenly, the high ground doesn't matter if you've got no access to clean water or refrigeration for critical medications. Meanwhile, your neighbor 2 streets down might be dealing with flooded roads that make bugging out impossible, so they'd have to stay no matter what, and it has nothing to do with how many hours of blackout they can tolerate. It's a question of whether they can physically drive anywhere. The same principle applies to civil unrest. You might see online that the best move is always to get out of any urban area at the first whiff of trouble. But in a real event, the roads might be blocked. Or maybe local officials quickly contain the unrest before it spills into your neighborhood, and you end up safer at home than stuck in a highway jam with thousands of frantic evacuees. There are countless real-world examples of how a seemingly solid plan can unravel in minutes because we can't predict every detail of how people around us will behave when fear spikes or when resources grow scarce. Some neighborhoods band together and keep each other safe, others turn on each other, and that local dynamic can matter more than any blanket advice you find. So when you hear me say, there's no perfect answer, I'm not trying to discourage planning. I'm encouraging you to plan more intelligently. Instead of looking for a yes or no formula, try building a matrix of conditions, or a mental map of what triggers would make you feel it's time to lock the doors or hit the road. Maybe your triggers revolve around the reliability of local utilities. So if the water supply is confirmed to be contaminated or the power grid is known to be down for weeks, that's one sign. Another might be the level of violence in your immediate area, and you define that not just by rumors, but by actual observations or verified reports of looting or armed groups. You might also watch official announcements, but take them with a grain of salt, because sometimes authorities say all is well when it's not. Or they might urge evacuation when you know local roads are impassable. You weigh all of these signals against each other, and that's how you adapt in real time. It's messy, but it's more accurate to what you'll face in a genuine emergency. Here's another layer of it. Your own skill set and physical condition might tip the scales one way or the other. If you're a fit person with experience in camping or wilderness survival, you might lean toward bugging out if you believe the environment around your home is about to become hostile. If you have limited mobility or a large family with small children who can't handle strenuous travel, you might try to bug in unless absolutely forced out. So the choice isn't purely about the external crisis. It's also about who you are, where you live, and what your group can handle. This is why I call it a myth, to think there's a single, universal solution. The best approach is to ditch the idea that you'll find a simple rule and instead build a layered plan that can shift with the circumstances. You're effectively saying, if conditions A, B, and C line up, we do this, but if X, Y, and Z occur, we switch gears. That's how you stay nimble, and that's how you overcome the unrealistic longing for a perfect answer you can memorize once and forever. Let's be honest, no matter how many supplies you have or how well you've studied your city's escape routes, the part that can really throw you for a loop is the sheer emotional gravity of deciding whether to stay or go. Because this isn't just a matter of picking up your car keys. You might have a family member who's insisting that you're overreacting, or a child who's too young to understand why you're packing the car, or a personal attachment to a house you've put money, sweat, and love into making a home. And the idea of leaving it behind to potential vandals or natural destruction can feel like a betrayal of everything you've built. That's the kind of emotional anchor that can make you second-guess yourself at the worst possible time. I've heard countless stories from people who saw all the signs pointing to a need to evacuate, but stayed because they just couldn't bring themselves to believe things would actually get that bad. And sometimes they got lucky, other times they didn't. On the flip side, there's a different kind of fear that pushes people out the door at the first sign of trouble, sometimes leading them into even bigger dangers, like congested highways with no gas, roving criminals preying on travelers, or even simpler issues like exhaustion, injuries, or losing track of family members in the chaos of a mass evacuation. In that scenario, the emotional toll is that you're terrified of staying put, convinced that the problem is right outside your door, so you scramble to leave without fully assessing if that's actually the better option. Maybe your street is calmer than you realized, and the real chaos is on the main roads, but you didn't gather enough info before bolting, so you end up leaping from the frying pan into the fire. This is why preppers often talk about having a calm, almost detached mindset when a crisis brews. It doesn't mean you ignore your feelings, it means you try to harness them in a way that keeps you clear-headed. If you're in a group or a family, it's incredibly helpful to have these conversations ahead of time, laying out potential triggers that everyone can agree on. For instance, you might all discuss that if there's sustained gunfire within a certain radius of your home for more than a day, or if official services like ambulances or fire trucks stop responding to calls in your area, that's a sign society has broken down enough that bugging out becomes the priority. Or if you hear on reliable channels that the local water supply is compromised and you can't purify it effectively, you might consider leaving before disease sets in. By having these thresholds mapped out, you reduce arguments when the tension spikes, because you already know what signs to look for and what you agreed to do if you see them. It's also important to consider mental health in a crisis, because the stress of hearing sirens all night, of seeing your neighbors panic, of dealing with possible violence, can wear you down or your loved ones down. Children especially pick up on fear, and if you have an elderly parent who might be confused by sudden upheaval, it adds a layer of emotional challenge. This can influence whether you decide to stay in familiar territory, hoping that comfort helps everyone cope, or whether you move, hoping to find a calmer environment. But again, if your home is located in a hot zone for looting, or if you know the local environment is about to become a war zone, that emotional desire to stay might be overshadowed by the bigger risk of staying in a place that's about to become untenable. So the emotional weight is real, and I encourage you to reflect on it now, not in the heat of the moment, because clarity under stress can be rare, and the more you've mentally rehearsed these scenarios, the less you'll be paralyzed by doubt or internal conflict when it's go time. One of the biggest reasons people lean toward bugging in is that they've spent months or even years building a stockpile of everything from canned food and dehydrated meals to medical supplies, and maybe even alternative energy setups like solar panels or a small wind turbine. And if that's you, the prospect of walking away from all that investment is downright painful. It's a huge decision to just leave behind a house full of resources that might keep you alive for weeks or months, especially if you're not certain the threat outside really warrants full evacuation. That's why bugging in can be so appealing in many scenarios, because you already have the advantage of space. There's only so much gear you can take if you evacuate, but at home you can store bulky water containers, multiple months of food, and heavier tools without worrying about how to transport them. However, resources only help if you can protect them. and if the environment doesn't degrade to the point where it's impossible to remain. If your neighborhood is prone to flooding, all that food in your basement might be ruined if water rises, or if you're dealing with an earthquake-prone area, your home might be structurally compromised after a severe shock, forcing you out anyway. And then there's the human element. A large stockpile can make you a target for looters or desperate neighbors once the crisis becomes obvious to everyone. That's why advanced preppers talk about concealment strategies like storing the bulk of your supplies in compartments that aren't immediately visible, or keeping decoy rations you can hand over if confronted while your main cache is hidden away. Some even bury caches in the yard, or at other locations, so if they're forced to leave, they don't lose everything. On the bug-out side, your resources are limited by weight, space, and the fact that a chaotic environment might mean you can't just drive a U-Haul loaded with everything you own. This is where the concept of a bug-out bag or kit comes in, which typically contains the essentials to survive for a certain duration, often 72 hours or more, depending on how you pack it. You might carry a compact water filter, high-calorie foods, basic shelter like a tarp or small tent, medical supplies, a fire-starting method, and maybe a means of defense if that's legal and within your skill set. But even the best bug-out bag can only hold so much, and traveling with heavy gear can become a liability if you have to move quickly or over tough terrain. This is why some people pre-position supplies at a friend's house in a different town, or in a storage unit they can reach by back roads, or even in a hidden cache in a national forest. It takes time and planning to set that up, but it can be a lifesaver if your home is destroyed or you have no chance to return. None of this is to say one approach is universally better. It's a calculation. How long do you realistically think you'd need to ride out the crisis if you stay? Is your home physically and socially defensible? Do you have neighbors who might help or hinder your efforts? And are you prepared to live in stealth mode to avoid drawing attention to your stockpile? If the answers are mostly yes, bugging in might be quite viable, at least initially. But if you foresee unstoppable threats, a raging fire, unstoppable floodwaters, an advancing war zone, then no supply closet is worth your life. And that's when bugging out becomes the only sane path, limited resources or not. So it's not just how many cans of soup you have, it's how relevant those cans of soup are to the actual danger you face, which is something only you can evaluate based on what you see unfolding around you. If you do decide, or are forced to leave your home base, the next headache is navigating roads and potential checkpoints in a time of crisis. It's easy to say you'll just jump in the car and drive away. But the moment thousands of people have that same idea, you get bottlenecks, gas shortages, and accidents that block major intersections. Even more insidious is the possibility of criminal groups taking advantage of the chaos to rob evacuees on highways or to set up their own roadblocks, posing as authority figures. That scenario isn't just out of a movie. It's happened in real disasters around the world. The solution is prior knowledge of alternative routes, possibly rural back roads or lesser-used highways that might not be on the main evacuation map. If you can scout them ahead of time, or at least study them in detail with paper maps, since GPS could fail, you'll be miles ahead of those who only know the main drag. There's also timing. Leaving too early can mean you get stuck in traffic with hordes of people who are panicking, or you arrive at your destination before it's fully ready to accommodate you. Leaving too late can mean you're trapped in gridlock or overrun by the very threat you're trying to escape. So you watch the news, talk to neighbors, check social media if it's still up, maybe even rely on a scanner to get real-time info on road conditions, and you weigh that against your gut feeling. Another factor is what vehicle you have. A fuel-efficient car with decent clearance might handle back roads better than a heavy truck that guzzles gas. Or maybe you have four-wheel drive and that's exactly what you need if roads are covered in debris. Some people keep jerry cans of fuel stashed so they can top off before leaving, because gas stations might be closed or mobbed by desperate people. If a vehicle route is totally unworkable, walking or biking might be your fallback, which drastically limits how much you can carry. But it also gets you around traffic jams if you can stay off major roads. Biking can be faster than walking, but you need a sturdy bike with proper tires. And you have to be prepared for the risk that a loaded bike can draw attention. On foot, you're more stealthy if you plan your routes well, maybe cutting through wooded areas or side streets, but it's slow going. And if you're in an unsafe region, you'll need to keep your eyes peeled. These realities might sound daunting, but they're also why planning is key. You don't want to be rummaging for a paper map or Googling directions at the last minute when cell towers might be down or jammed. Familiarize yourself with the roads around you. Take weekend drives just to see how they connect, and consider marking potential hazards or safe rest spots if you can identify them. Even knowing which grocery stores or gas stations are out of the way can help you if you need a quick resupply when most people swarm the main commercial areas. Essentially, movement is its own entire puzzle that you can solve bit by bit before a crisis hits, so you're not improvising under maximum stress. If you stick with bugging in, there's a big difference between just staying home and truly preparing your space to be defensible and quiet under pressure. Let's say your neighborhood is relatively calm on day 1 of a crisis, but by day 3, people are desperate for food, or a group decides this area is ripe for looting, and you're in the crosshairs because someone spilled the beans that you have a generator, or that you were the only one who stocked up on fuel. That's where layered defenses come into play. And it starts with simple reinforcements like adding security film to your windows so they don't shatter easily, replacing short screws in your door hinges with longer ones that grip the frame, installing a solid metal bar you can drop into brackets behind the door to make it harder to kick in, and maybe even rearranging furniture so there's no straight path from the front door to your main living area. The idea is to slow down intruders enough that you either scare them off or have time to respond. But the best defense is often not being singled out. If your neighborhood goes dark, you might switch off exterior lights, keep your windows covered so no one sees your flashlight beams at night, and avoid broadcasting that you have a hot meal cooking. People sometimes cook in an enclosed room with a small vent or an open window up high, so smells don't drift down the street, or they use simpler foods that don't produce strong aromas. It might sound extreme, but hunger drives people to do things they normally wouldn't. So it's safer to assume that if you smell like grilled steak while everyone else is starving, you might get unwanted visitors. Similarly, you might limit generator use to odd times, or place your generator in a spot that muffles noise, so it's not droning on for hours in the wide open. Some folks even build a baffle box with insulation that dampens the sound, ensuring you're not advertising your power situation to everyone in earshot. Then there's the idea of decoy stashes. If someone does threaten you, and you have no choice but to give them something, it helps to have a smaller stash of canned goods and less expensive items in an obvious place, so you can say, "This is all we have, take it and leave," while your real stores remain hidden under floorboards or in a locked closet behind a nondescript panel. The same goes for valuables. Maybe keep an old, broken electronic device visible so it looks like all your electronics are junk. It's about playing mind games so opportunistic criminals think they've scored your stuff and move on. None of this guarantees your safety, but it stacks the odds in your favor. Of course, all of these measures need to be done quietly and over time, because hammering boards onto your windows at the last second might draw curious eyes. The principle here is that once a crisis is looming, you want to look as uninteresting as possible on the outside, while being as robustly prepared as you can manage on the inside. A hidden advantage is if you have neighbors you trust, you can coordinate watch schedules or share tasks. But trust is tricky in a high-stress event, so hopefully you've built that rapport ahead of time. The last piece is emotional discipline. If someone bangs on your door demanding food, or if a neighbor sees you cooking and starts telling others, you might feel pressured to help or to snap in anger. Having a calm, prepared stance can keep a bad situation from spiraling, but that's easier said than done when tensions are high. So, you see, bugging in is about a lot more than just saying, "I'll stay home." It's about controlling your environment, your habits, and the way you present yourself to the desperate masses around you, if you have any at your doorstep at all. What ties all of this together, everything from deciding when to leave to fortifying your home if you stay, is the ability to adapt quickly as new information rolls in. And that's why having a flexible mindset may be your single greatest asset in a crisis. You can have the best gear, a sturdy home, and a perfect route mapped. But if you're too rigid to see that the plan isn't fitting the situation, you can walk yourself right into failure. It's like the classic example of folks who say, "I'll bug in no matter what," and then they fail to notice that a localized chemical spill is heading their way, or that a wildfire changed direction. By the time they realize they do need to evacuate, the roads are blocked, or official barriers are up, and they're stuck. Conversely, you have folks who vow to always bug out at the first sign of trouble but end up in a gridlocked highway or a violent confrontation because they left in a blind rush without verifying how bad things really were at home. A flexible mindset means you keep scanning your environment. Maybe you have a battery or solar-powered radio, or you check social media if it's still live, or you talk to your neighbors, or watch for official announcements that might give clues about how widespread the crisis is. You then weigh that info against the triggers you set beforehand. For instance, if you said you'd leave if the power is still off after 5 days and you see no restoration efforts, that might be your sign. But if on day 4, you notice utility trucks in your neighborhood making progress, you might hold off a little longer. The point is, you don't cling to a single plan if the data says conditions have changed. That requires not just planning but also humility. To admit maybe your initial guess was wrong or that reality doesn't match the scenario you prepared for. You can cultivate this adaptability by doing what I call micro drills in daily life. If you're planning to bug out on foot, grab your pack one weekend, walk a mile or two, and pay attention to how your body feels, how your gear holds up, and how you handle it mentally. If you're planning to bug in, try living without using your stove or power for a day to simulate a blackout and see how your family reacts. Note the little things that become big annoyances quickly, like the lack of refrigeration, or how easily you can slip up and let light leak from a window at night. These small tests teach you where you're strong and where you're weak, and they also help you get used to being flexible. You might discover a skill you need to learn, or a piece of gear that's missing, or that your triggers for leaving need to be adjusted. The real magic is not letting your ego trap you. If you put a ton of work into building a fortress at home, that doesn't mean you should stay if the city around you is engulfed in violence, or if a natural disaster is guaranteed to break your defenses. If you stockpiled a year's worth of food but the entire region is being evacuated for unstoppable fires, no amount of canned beans will save you if the flames hit your block. That's the mental game, acknowledging that a crisis might not care about your preferences or your efforts. A flexible mindset is about survival, not about being right. It's the hardest part in my view because we get attached to our gear, our homes, and the identity we've built as prepared individuals. But real preparedness is about rolling with the punches, not just taking them. We've traveled a long road here, exploring everything from the myth that there's a perfect answer for whether to bug in or bug out, to the raw emotional drag of leaving a home behind or locking yourself inside while chaos brews outside. And we dug into how your resource situation can sway you in either direction. How actual movement is never as simple as turning the key in your ignition. How you might fortify and conceal your home if you decide staying is the best bet. And how building that flexible mindset can save you when the reality of a crisis veers off from the textbook scenarios you imagined. At the end of the day, what I want you to take away is that there is no universal formula that's going to fit every storm, every riot, every disaster. Because real life is too messy, and your local conditions, be they geographic, social, or family-related, will dictate so much about what's safe and what's foolish. The good news is that you're not powerless. By addressing these issues now, before the sirens start screaming, you can set yourself up with layered plans and personal readiness that let you pivot as soon as you see which way the wind is blowing. Yes, it's more work to think in shades of gray rather than black and white. But that extra layer of nuance is exactly what keeps you from panicking in the face of contradictory news reports, or from ignoring blatant danger signs, because you're too attached to one strategy, and it's also what helps you preserve your mental equilibrium if you do have to make a gut-wrenching choice, like leaving behind a house full of memories or refusing a neighbor's request for help, because you genuinely don't have enough resources to share without jeopardizing your family. These dilemmas are part of real crises, and we do ourselves a favor by recognizing them ahead of time. I appreciate you sticking with me through all of this because it's not always comfortable to picture worst-case scenarios. But the biggest asset you have is the knowledge that you can handle it if you prepare thoughtfully. So if this conversation sparked some ideas, I encourage you to keep learning, practicing, and discussing with the people you trust. And if you want more, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Share this video with someone else who might benefit. And please consider joining my free bi-weekly newsletter, because as soon as you sign up, you can download my ebook, Surviving Civil Unrest, a complete guide, which is full of deeper dives on these and other crucial topics. Above all, remember that staying calm, keeping your wits about you, and being ready to switch gears when the evidence suggests you should is what will carry you through a crisis more than any single gadget or stockpile. That's how you make the decision to bug in or bug out without letting fear or stubbornness be your guiding force. And that's how you give yourself the best odds when the stakes are at their highest. Stay safe out there, stay flexible, and I'll catch you in the next one.